I think this localization is so important, not just translation, copy paste. That can get you by for a little bit. That's a bit of like a kind of a growth hack, if you will, but it's not going to be a long-term solution to your problem.
Welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast, where experts discuss international content management, product localization, and global expansion. I'm Caterina from Undertow, and today our founder, Nicola Calabrese, will be talking to Ashley Herbert Popa, Head of Product Marketing at Sendcloud. In this episode, Ashley shares her wealth of experience in navigating the challenges of international expansion, especially in the B2B SaaS space. From identifying high-potential markets to adapting strategies for cultural differences and creating seamless customer experience, Ashley provides actionable insights that every marketer, product manager, and founder can use. So let's dive into this amazing conversation.
Hi, Ashley, and welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast. How are you today?
Hey, good. How are you doing?
All good, all good. And today we're going to talk about product marketing, international expansion. But before we jump right into the topic, would you mind telling us a bit about yourself and your role at Sendcloud?
I am the head of product marketing at Sendcloud. I have been leading product marketing teams for the last 5 years or so. And product marketing is sometimes a bit of a black box. So I'll give you a little intro of what we do. So at Sendcloud, we're responsible for the go-to-market strategies that accelerate growth, build differentiation, and deliver customer value. And we're a bit of a two-way street, or bridge, if you will, between the market, our customers, and the internal organization. I'm American, as maybe you can hear from my accent. So I moved up to the Netherlands 8 years ago, and I have a husband, 2 kids, 2 dogs. So I have a pretty busy, chaotic life on the personal side, and a busy, chaotic life on the work side as well, but I tend to thrive in those situations.
And so the first question is a bit of a big one, something that I hear often. Companies want to expand internationally, but the first thing they will think where should we go? Where should we go next? Even if they're already international, they have to think about what's the next step? What are the countries we might go in? So my first question will be, how do you identify potential international markets that is worth expanding into? And what kind of research do you carry out to understand local customer needs and preferences?
I think if you have a more product-led product, so if you have some sort of freemium or trial, then you can typically see some countries that are already starting to use your product without doing a lot of effort, and maybe they're staying for a while. That might be a market to look into a bit further. That's already an early indicator that without putting a lot of effort or money into exploring, that you might have a good product market fit there. So that could be a good case to start looking into it. If you don't have that, or if you decide to start to be a bit more intentional about it, I think the standard is, do we have product market fit there? Or can we somewhat easily, but without investing a lot of money into it? Is there a market for it? So I would look into potential or maybe even current competitors that are already there. What are people using? Because sometimes that can be a spreadsheet, or sometimes that can be a software just like what you have. So how are they operating in the market so far? How are they doing? How deep are they in there as well? Do they have sales reps, CSMs, an office maybe? So then you can kind of get a feel for the potential there. There's, of course, you can do total addressable market and service addressable market as well, if you can find some sort of reports. If you have a pretty good partnership program, I actually think partners are a great way to start exploring the market. It's sort of like a friend that you have there that maybe can give you an overview of what they've seen from competitors if they're also partnered with them. I think partnerships are a great way to start exploring different markets or different industries or different segments without putting a lot of investment behind it.
And once you identified what markets actually is worth going in, how do you think cultural differences affect the international expansion? And how do you ensure your product will fit the new market with a different, let's say, cultural landscape?
I think you're going to see different, bigger cultural differences depending on which regions you're going after. So if you're mostly looking at, let's say, Northern Europe, I don't think you're going to have a mass difference in between cultures. There are things, nuances you should pay attention to, of course. But one example, when I used to work for a company that was they built gym software. So software is for big gym chains or personal trainers, and they would have exercises and sort of examples and pictures of people exercising. And one thing we had to change within the product itself is that we had pictures of women who were wearing sports bras or shorts or different types of clothes when working out. And we had a client that was big in the Middle East, and we had to remove all of those photos for them specifically because it wasn't appropriate for that region, for that market. So product wise, we had to make some adjustments there. But I think for the rest of Europe where we were already, it didn't make much of a difference. Nobody really had a problem with it or asked us to remove it. So I think things like that can mean a product change or a cultural differences. I think it's maybe bigger on the marketing side, especially if you're not going to go into a big regional difference, let's say Europe versus Asia or something, then the marketing does play a role in it. So I've worked for a lot of Dutch companies, and one thing is when we go into Germany, for example, depending on the industry that you have and the software that you have and who you're targeting, there are a lot of German companies that can be kind of old school. So you'll see that they prefer more formal language, or they still like print. Print is still big there, or the adoption of tech is just slower in general. So while a Dutch company, we're maybe higher up within the segment, for a German company, we're still using more, I don't know, a simpler language, but we're talking to like a less tech mature audience. So you have to speak a little bit differently with them. But yeah, I think those are the biggest things I've seen with cultural changes.
Yeah, I mean, definitely if there's a different market maturity for your product in different countries, that affects. It's interesting that you mentioned also the channels being different, like having, let's say, more print materials in a market. Apart from the tone of voice, which I wouldn't say is too surprising to have a different tone of voice in different countries. But yeah, the different channels, sometimes it's I think, underestimated. How it could be like something is, even if it's like within Europe, so not far like from a distant, like physical distance, there might be completely different channels that they keep into account.
Yeah, because print was so big for them, we actually ended up building something within our product that let them print out something in the product because they like to print things so much. They like the actual paper format. So that also kind of retranslated back into our product as well. They're the only market that was asking for it. So we built that feature specifically for them. But yeah, I think the channels can definitely differ for, you need to be where your audience is, right? Germany is also a good example. Like I worked for a recruitment software, and of course, LinkedIn is big for most people, but it was Zing in Germany. So yeah, different channels definitely plays a role.
Yeah, and also sometimes even payment methods that like more used in some countries than others.
Absolutely.
When you're going in a different market, it's always like a collaborative effort. So you have to work with other departments within the company. That's always the case. But like when you're going international, that's usually, I say, a different kind of set of challenges. So how do you collaborate with other team, like sales, customer support, to ensure like a cohesive approach to the market entry?
I think if you're not collaborating with other people internally, you should just expect to fail. It's not one team is doing it. Maybe on the research side, you can put more weight onto one team. I think if you're really planning to go all in, you definitely have to have everybody there. My big thing is if you don't have product market fit, it's just no use in wasting the money when it comes to marketing dollars. So product definitely has to be a big driver here when it comes to making sure that we understand what's needed from a product side to make sure that we have product market fit. Or are we competitive? Do we have everything that they need from like a legal standpoint, or, ticking all other boxes at least of an MVP? So product needs to be involved quite early. Then when it comes to actually marketing into that country or to that market, you need to be asking the marketing team, what channel should we be using? Ask them to do some research and dig into that to see where we should be. Again, going back to the channels, it does play a big role. So yeah, you need somebody who's going to pay attention to that. Maybe you start with a freelancer who can help with at least translating some content. So you sort of have this bare minimum, this MVP to go into. But yeah, which product should we be positioning to this market? How? Let's build a little bit of content. So then we have, at least like, especially depending on the language barrier, maybe if you're moving from the Netherlands to Belgium, it's not that big of a difference. But if you're going into Spain or Italy or even Germany, then you do need to have content that's in their own language. And then you need to start selling. So you also need to loop in sales. So hire a sales rep who speaks the language, or maybe you just get lucky and one of your sales reps already speaks that language. They can kind of do a couple, 2 markets. They need enablement to do their job. So you have your sales deck and the language they need. And then you need to just monitor the conversations that you're having. Is it working so far? You need to constantly be looking at, is this working? And then I think there's a few, like you brought up billing and currencies earlier. So I think there's a few stakeholders that you don't really think about involving, like finance is fine. Are we offering billing and currencies for the market that we're going into? recruitment. Do they understand the recruitment space there? Do we need to offer more money for this country or less money? What does this look like? Legal. I think it's really a company-wide effort, and you need maybe one person or one or two people to really drive it, but there should be quite a big collaboration between each department.
Yeah, and I like when you said there to have like a minimum viable product for the content to have in the market, that we always push for a framework that we call the minimum viable experience to analyze the customer journey. Before you go into a new market, analyze the customer journey, all the steps. What are the touch points? What's the must have, like the stuff that you need to have in place? From a customer and user point of view, it's not great if you like have stuff in your language and then you end up on an English page or a page in Dutch and you don't speak the language. It's really confusing. But yes, to have the minimum so you can start, check out how it is, and then you can move, like gradually scale up where you see traction. So you can test different markets and then you double down on where you have actually traction.
Yeah. And you make a good point there too about the customer journey. Are they going to hit a point where they can't go any further? They experience some kind of friction. I think, especially if you're looking at a market where they have a lower tech experience or lower tech maturity, one thing people don't really think about are help articles or like any kind of support enablement that your customer might need. So are you going to get all the way to the end and then have trouble actually using the product? And then you don't have any support docs that are in the language that I need, but I need extra help. Then that means that you're going to spend more money for the support team to make sure that they're addressing all the tickets that come through. So that's going to cost you money in the end, where you could have just had some help content that was ready to go within their language. So I think that's something that can definitely be missed. And you really have to think about the customer journey and the audience that you're talking to. What do they need to be successful? Because you can bring them in, maybe you make money on the sale, but if they're not going to stick around because they have so much trouble using your product, then that's also just a waste of everybody's time and money.
Yeah, and you mentioned before, if you have like a freemium, what are the scenarios that say the actions that they usually take when they convert? Like, so you make sure like you test those, you make sure they are smooth in the language. So when they go there, they're not going to get friction and drop off. They're just going to convert. And when it comes to, you have stuff like the initial email campaign where they get onboarded, there's links to help send the article. If they go to those articles and they are in English or in a language they don't speak, as you said, like it will increase tickets they get maybe for stuff that you already have the reply on your website is just not translated. And rather than like spending all the money maybe to translate the whole website for marketing purposes, you might just need a micro version of that at the beginning and use the money that you haven't used that to create the rest of the experience. So they get a consistent experience, but not like without having to do the whole thing, which will be obviously a bigger effort and will take time. Yeah,
exactly. I think a microsite is a great way to, again, MVP it. So you have your MVP for products. Let's do the MVP for marketing and for support or whatever it is that you click connect there, where you have your best performing articles connected there that are translated into the language, your support material, whatever they need can be on that microsite. And then you can just build out from there. I think that's a great way to get started small and then expand.
Yeah. And you're already set up because you already did the analysis. So you know what's next. Like the stuff that you couldn't do the first sprint, you do the second time around. When you see this traction, you go and you expand gradually, going by priority level, basically. And it's interesting as well, like once you actually launched in a new market, what kind of key performance indicator do you track to make sure like to see like, is this a success or maybe it's not going as well as we thought it would be? And how frequently do you reassess these metrics?
Yeah, I like to, first of all, to enter into a new market. I think kind of the easiest way is to sort of do this bowling pin approach where you kind of start with one and then you start to pivot to other ones that are similar, maybe a little bit of differences, but until you start knocking them all down, let's say, but you kind of just go one by one. I'm stealing that from April Dunford. I think she does that with positioning, but I like doing that also with the market entry as well, because that means it's not going to be a lot of extra work for your product teams or internal teams, ideally, or maybe you don't have as much of a language barrier or cultural differences. So how can we kind of go piece by piece without making drastic differences? And that also makes it easier to set KPIs and sort of benchmarks for what you can expect. So then if you're entering a new market that's similar to one you already are in, then you can say, okay, our benchmark for this market that we're currently in is XYZ. Let's kind of assume somewhat similar for this other market. And then you already have benchmarks of what you can expect in addition to the, let's say, the TAM and the SAM that you've already started to run for the markets. Then you kind of know, okay, what's our cost of acquisition in this market? What's our win rate, our new business, net retention rate? So of course, your main business KPIs. And are they sort of somewhat matching the benchmark that we have for the current market that we're in. But I think you need to be somewhat careful about this because you can enter in different markets with different expectations as well. So maybe your main market that you're in, your home market is like your cash cow, let's say. And then we want this other market to be more of like our growth lever. So it's a bit different. We're going to have different expectations from it, as in we're going to invest in it differently. We're going to have different expectations. So you need to also make sure that you're not having the same expectation for every market you're in. Really assess what you want out of it. If it's something similar to your current market, you can use those benchmarks, like I said earlier. But if it's like a growth market, then you need to be looking at it a bit different. You need to set, of course, those still like what's our cost of acquisition? Does it still make sense? What's our win rate? But have different expectations for it and understand that this is a growth market. So maybe you're going to spend a bit more money up front. So it's going to take a little bit longer for you to see the same expectations that you would have for your cash cow market, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree because sometimes if you're comparing it to your home market where you've been maybe active for several years, you work so much to hone everything in and you expect like the new market to perform exactly like that. It's a bit like unfair, I would say.
You spend so much money and time. And I think it's often underestimated how much brand plays a role and like the brand familiarity plays a role in people's decision makers. We were at Sassiest and I can't remember what her name is, but the woman from LinkedIn, she had that great overview of B2B buying process and how important brand is in it. So if everybody in the buying committee knows the brand, then it's way more likely, I think 80% more likely or something was the number to have the deal go through. Whereas if they don't know it, even if it's a better product, it doesn't matter. They won't feel comfortable going with it. So you being in that market for a long time, your brand is being built up, word of mouth is going on, referrals are going on. So people feel comfortable with it, even if they've never experienced the actual product before. And that plays a big role. And if you're starting new in a new market, then it takes time to build that up.
And there might even be a different, let's say, competitive landscape. You get in there might be already companies that have been active in that country for years. So you have some catch up to do. Yeah, as well. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So even if you have a better product, if you have better differentiation, people don't feel comfortable putting their neck on the line, their job on the line for a company that nobody really knows that well. So you have a lot of work to do when it comes to making people feel comfortable going with you, especially if you're not the cheapest on the market. Yeah, that's a barrier you have to get through. And also like
if your competitor is the status quo, so like they're used to doing things in a certain way and you are disruptive, but they don't know you. So there's like a trust barrier as well as a brand you have to overcome there. Yeah.
Yeah. So you need to do a lot of work to like you said, build trust, build that brand presence. I think I've been doing a lot of research and looking into and reading books around the buying decision process. And it's not necessarily convincing them that they will win with your product, but they're worse off by not having it. So you really have to cover every single basis with enablement, with the way that you're selling, your marketing strategy, everything really. But yeah, you have a long road to go if you're new to the market.
And that's one of the things, for example, that from a localization point of view is different, very different B2C and B2B, in the sense that in B2B SaaS, you might have like the product in a lot of languages because the end user are not necessarily the decision makers. So you might have like end user that are in 20 countries, but the people actually making the buying decision are in a couple of countries. So you need just those for marketing to be able to go deep enough and like do all this brand awareness and convincing, but you don't necessarily need to do in the whole 20 countries. So that's a big difference. While in B2C, it's quite a bit overlapping. So it's a whole different set of challenges, but it's a different thing. So that's something really interesting about B2B as well. Yeah.
Like you said, your end users might not be the people who are actually buying the software. And that makes it so much more complex. Yeah. You have several people to convince here. So yeah, a lot of the companies I've worked for, the products themselves were available in so many languages, and even to the point where you can customize. So if you're not available in a language, you can upload translations that you want to be in your own language. But we actually only had sales reps and support people within, 4 or 5 different markets. So yeah, because that's where the buyers were and the users were kind of everywhere. So we could operate quite globally. But if you really looked at where we were spending our dollars and we were going to market, it was only within like or four markets. Yeah.
I think it's a big opportunity as well, because there are even countries, imagine like the Nordics, they are usually quite comfortable, depending on the vertical, but they're quite comfortable with English. So you may still get away with like having marketing communication in English there and then being able to expand without having to do like create a whole office, hire a lot of people.
Yeah. And that's kind of to the point I had about the bowling pin approach is which markets can we try that don't take a lot of investment up front? So can they speak English? Yeah. Do we have to do a lot of work to sort of accommodate them being successful? What are the easy ones? Now, this doesn't always work because at Sendcloud, we're operating in the UK, but we're finding that it's so expensive to try to operate there that it's actually really not worth so much investment, even though from like a upfront side, like they already speak English. We don't have to do a lot of work on that point, but yeah, it's quite expensive to acquire new customers. I think you would also see that in the US as well. It's quite expensive to acquire new customers, but their market is also so mature and it's such a big country that it's not really something you can just kind of copy paste like you can for other markets.
Yeah. And actually you can anticipate my next question, which is about if you noted that the initial results are not meeting your expectations, what steps do you take to adapt your strategy? And if you can share some example, I think you can already did, but if you can go a little bit more in detail about that, like what you usually do when you see things are not working out as you thought.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of steps that you have. So, can we try something different? Is it a product thing that we're running into? Then let's try to invest some things from a product standpoint to be competitive. I think there is a point where you're stretching yourself too thin and you cannot reasonably deliver to be competitive there. I'll give an example of the last company I was with. We had like 10% of our revenue was coming from the US market. So we thought, well, we're not doing anything there, and yet we have quite a bit of revenue there. Let's try to enter the US market. We had a great product. Our customers that used our product loved it. So we did have some product market fit there. We had happy customers there. But the market there is quite mature when it came to the industry that I was in. Honestly, any kind of software or product you have, the US market is just, 10 years ahead. So it's very difficult to be competitive there if you're entering like an already established category or already established market. So we were not able to build fast enough, not because the product team wasn't able to, but just we were trying so hard to be relevant with EU markets that we just didn't have the capacity to also try to be competitive in the US market. So it was also difficult from a marketing standpoint because a lot of people kind of like Americans that are going into the EU, they look at all the countries the same. I think we do that vice versa, but as well, we look at US like it's all the same. But it's such a massive country. There's a lot of differences that are in there. And it's really expensive to acquire new customers if you're just going to kind of address the whole market. So you really need to kind of pick some areas, some target areas of, okay, let's go into this geographic area or these cities and really have maybe more of a bottom-up approach where you're looking at how do we build communities and pay attention to our customers, have that more word of mouth and community side of things. We ended up actually pulling out of the market. Of course, we didn't cut things off completely, but we had an office there. We had support people, salespeople, everything, but it was just too expensive of an investment for us to continue to make sense. And we were spreading ourselves a bit too thin. So we decided we'll just focus on the markets that we have in the EU as a start and eventually go back because we do have something going on there. But yeah, we will pull away focus from the entire company if we also try to win there. It's quite difficult.
Yeah, I think with the US, because I heard similar stories quite a lot. And I think the fact that obviously everybody speaks English there gives the false impression that it's homogeneous, all the same. So you can apply the same strategy throughout. But yeah, I mean, it's a big market, but still it is different, every part of it. Yeah. So sometimes it might be easier to just go to another EU country. Even if it's a smaller market, it might be easier to do. You don't have to do the time difference. You can still do stuff from your head office rather than having to open a new office over there.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it was a big barrier, but there was a growing need we saw from customers in the US who really wanted their support teams within the US. I think not just from a time difference standpoint, I think that did play a part, but also just I think Americans can often be they want to support American companies. You see that also in Germany as well. They have a tendency to go towards German companies. I'm sure there's other companies, markets in the EU that feel the same. But yeah, just because the industry we were in, the category we were in, other softwares had been there for years and years and years ahead of us. So it was just hard to compete at a level where our sales reps were still able to close at what we expected and be worth our investment. We had a plan to do this more regional approach. I do think it would have fared much better, but it is, again, an investment. You want boots on the ground. You want people to be able to attend these community-led events that you have. It's a lot of work. It can be worth the efforts. But yeah, I think companies also need to think about focus. Like, can you be everywhere? Is it worth being everywhere? Do you have the capacity, the headcount to be everywhere? Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, still, you're in another country, you still need some coordination with headquarters as well. So that's adds work at the headquarters as well. Yeah.
And let's say you have different offices. I would say another barrier we had is once we had an office in the US, it was hard for them to feel really integrated into the culture of the company because they weren't always able to be in all of the meetings, or yeah, it kind of felt like a little brother always asking for things. I think, yeah, well, you have to think about that as well when you have these new offices that are working on just the singular regions. How are they going to be supported? How are you going to integrate them into the company culture? What does that look like? So can be another barrier when you start to enter new markets and add offices as well.
And once you are in a market, let's say you're getting good results and you look to sustain and grow your presence in that market, like what long-term strategies do you implement to ensure ongoing relevance and success?
I think continue to map out and monitor that expectations are for the market. Are they that cash cow? Are they that, that growth market or something else? At what point do they change? Because maybe they're always evolving. At some point, yeah, you will probably reach this service addressable market that you have perhaps in one or two markets. So where are you going to continue to look for? So I think making sure that you're monitoring that quite regularly. So you set expectations that you're delivering on that and you change them to the next phase whenever it's time to change, sort of like products as well. Is it time to retire or sunset this product? And when do we build new ones? What stages is that? I think the other thing is to grow your presence and to truly be successful in that market. I do think you need local people. In some countries, it probably is mandatory to have an office. Again, just because it's happened so often for me, I'm going to give Germany again as the example. But in order to really be a German business, you have to have the GmbH, which means you have to have an address and a phone number within Germany. So you do have to, I think, long-term successful, have an office in Germany to be successful there. Hire locals, so not just translation agencies, but have somebody who's actually going to be writing content from their perspective of your company. That's not just a translation, but a true localization. What terms are they using? How are they speaking? I don't speak many other languages than English, but I hear often that you can really tell when it's just translated versus localized and using the actual terminology that you have. So, and then support agents as well, of course, are quite important so they can speak the language that your customers are using. I think that's also the way that you get community feel. Building up the community is being boots on the ground, having people who can host meetups for your customers or events, can speak their language, can really understand what their pain points are. I've interviewed a lot of customers who don't speak English as their first language. And while they're amazing at speaking English, I understand them perfectly. There is always this kind of gap or barrier where they don't always feel like they can really express themselves fully in a language that's not their native language, which is fully understandable. But then I do think you kind of miss some things when that's the case. But it's much easier for them to speak to people that are, from their own market, from their own language. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess it helps you as well, like long term, to refine the message in that country, because you might see some pain points that are like secondary in a different market that might be like a very important issue for that market. I'm taking again Germany as an example, like data and privacy. It's usually more important in Germany than in other countries in the EU, even though the regulation is pretty much it's the same around Europe, but they care more about that usually. So these kind of things, once you see your market is working, you have people on the ground from that country, it helps you to get a feel of those issues as well. And as you said, like creating content, that's the time maybe where you create content and campaigns just for that market, because maybe it doesn't make much sense to do it in other countries, but it's very important for that one. So that's sounds quite good. Yeah.
I think you will also point out, of course, Germany cares more. It does care more about the GDPR compliance, or they're quite by the book there. But I think there can be specific country laws that come in as well. The last company I worked for was a recruitment company. So any kind of workplace legal changes that went on. So if you cannot message people outside of work hours, that's a colleague, if you need to be registering the number of hours that you work every week for whatever legal compliance, then those are the things that are going to be easier for you to keep up with when you're actually in the market, embedded in the market, and speak the language. Because as an English speaker, I can set all of the Google alerts I want, but if I don't know the terms that are used within that language, I'm going to miss things. So you really need those people who can pay attention to those, because that is going to change perhaps your product market fit. If it's a legal requirement to do this and your product should be doing it and a competitor does, then you no longer have MVP. You don't have product market fit anymore. So you need to work on that as well and make sure you're staying ahead of the game.
I think that was great. And I think we need to wrap up for today. But it was really great conversation. Is there anything else you would like to add before we close?
Maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think this localization is so important. True localization, not just translation, copy paste. That can get you by for a little bit. That's a bit of like a kind of a growth hack, if you will, but it's not going to be a long-term solution to your problem. You really need the true localization and thinking about these things intentionally when entering new markets. Otherwise, you're going to fail. It's just not an if, but a when.
Yeah, I mean, we were a bit based this side, but yeah, I agree. What I always stress is the importance of like doing things gradually, not going all in, because you might run the risk of like burning through a lot of money before you figure out like maybe sometimes you might even realize a market is not as promising as you thought, and others that you undervalued, they're actually a big promise. And if you invested too much in one, you don't have the resources to go in like properly into another one as well. I really like the bowling pin analogy that you did. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's quite good. Okay, so it was a great conversation, and thank you so much for joining us on the Multilingual Content Podcast.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. The Multilingual Content Podcast is powered by Undertow. We help companies translate their content into results. Get in touch if you want to know more. And if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episode. See you next time.